The night had been quiet, too quiet for a stretch of land that usually sang with coyotes and the rattle of insects. The lantern on the porch burned low, a dying flame swaying against the wind. Caleb sat there, one boot on the railing, a rifle leaning against his knee, the kind of man who had seen more graves than weddings, more betrayals than kindness. His land was dust and bone, the kind of place where only the strong or the stubborn held on. And tonight, he felt the air shift, the way it does when trouble comes riding. It wasn't a knock on the door. It was lighter, softer, like fingertips too weak to follow through. Caleb rose slow, shotgun in hand, the boards creaking under his weight. He pulled the door open, half expecting the empty dark. Instead, she was there, barefoot, skin pale under the moonlight, hair tangled, falling across her shoulders like she'd run through the desert itself. A thin white dress clung to her frame, torn in places, stained in ways he didn't want to ask about. Her eyes found his like she already knew who he was. She didn't beg, didn't plead. She only smiled, a crooked, tired smile, and said, "I'm already gone." The words didn't make sense at first, not to him. Caleb lowered the shotgun, but didn't let it go. He'd seen women show up at ranches before, runaways, broken wives, saloon girls looking for anything better than what they left behind. But this one looked different. She wasn't just running. She looked like she had been emptied out already, like the life in her had been buried somewhere far behind. "Sit," he muttered, jerking his head toward the chair by the fire. She stepped inside without hesitation, bare feet whispering across the wooden floor. The firelight touched her face, and that's when Caleb saw it, bruises dark across her jaw, cuts along her collarbone, the kind of marks no accident could explain. His stomach turned, but he said nothing. Words were cheap in the desert. He poured her water, slid the glass across the table. She didn't drink, just wrapped her hands around it like she needed to remember what warmth felt like. Caleb watched her carefully, trying to piece it together. "Who sent you here?" he asked, voice low. "No one," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "Not anymore." That smile returned, faint, haunting. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was the kind a person wears when they've already accepted something terrible, when they've made peace with the end before it even comes. Caleb felt the hairs on his arms rise. He had seen men smile like that on battlefields, in saloons just before the trigger was pulled. The dogs outside began to bark, low and steady. Caleb stiffened, shotgun in hand, and moved to the window. Dust rolled along the trail in the distance. One rider, then another, then three. The moon caught the glint of their guns. "You bring them here?" Caleb asked without looking at her. "They were always coming," she answered. "Doesn't matter where I go." The way she said it made his chest tighten. He'd spent years keeping to himself, carving out a ranch in the middle of nowhere to avoid other people's sins. But now it seemed their sins had ridden straight to his door. The riders slowed as they reached the front gate. One, bigger than the rest, swung down from his horse, spurs jangling. His voice carried through the dark. "Evening, rancher. Heard you got something belongs to me." Caleb stepped onto the porch, shotgun cradled in his arms. "I don't keep what ain't mine." The man laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "Pretty thing. Blonde, quiet, dresses in white. Saw her slip this way. She's mine by law, mine by blood. Ain't no place for her but where I put her." Caleb spat into the dirt. "Funny thing about law. It don't mean much when you've got no soul to back it." The man's smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare. His hand hovered near his pistol. "Careful, old man. She's trouble. You don't want to die for someone who's already dead inside." Behind Caleb, the girl's voice floated from the doorway. "He's right." Caleb turned, startled. She was standing there, pale against the firelight, her hands clutching the frame. But her eyes weren't scared. They were calm, distant, as though she'd accepted something far beyond the reach of these men. "I told you," she whispered, "I'm already gone." The words chilled Caleb in a way bullets never had. He'd fought in wars, stared down killers, seen men die with curses on their lips. But he had never seen someone carry their own death like it was a second skin. He stepped in front of her, raised a shotgun toward the men outside. "Trail's long behind you, boys," Caleb said. "You best ride it back before it buries you." The leader sneered. "This ain't over. We'll be back." He mounted up, spit into the dirt, and the three of them rode off, dust trailing behind like smoke from fire that hadn't finished burning. Caleb didn't breathe until they were gone. He turned back to her. She hadn't moved. That same ghostly smile clung to her lips. "You're going to get me killed," he muttered. "Maybe," she said, "but you were already waiting for it, weren't you?" He wanted to argue, but the truth of her words silenced him. Men like him didn't wait for peace. They waited for the storm to come knocking. And tonight it had found him. The days that followed blurred into one another. She stayed in the small room off the kitchen, rarely spoke, barely ate. Sometimes she sat by the window, staring at the horizon like she expected it to split open and swallow her whole. Caleb worked the land, mended fences, fed the stock, but his eyes always flicked back to the house, to that fragile figure haunting its walls. One afternoon, he found her standing by the barn, running her fingers along the wood like she was feeling for something lost. "You ever build anything?" he asked. She shook her head. He handed her a hammer. Best way to feel alive again is to put your hands on something that stays standing when you're done. Her first swing was clumsy, the hammer glancing off the nail. She winced, but Caleb just nodded. Again. She tried, missed, then tried again. By the fifth swing, the nail went clean through. She let out a shaky breath, and for the first time since she arrived, the smile that touched her lips wasn't haunted. It was real, small but real. Caleb felt something stir in him, something he'd buried long ago. But peace never lasts in the desert. The riders came back just before sundown, 5 this time. The dogs growled low as Caleb stepped out, rifle in hand. The leader dismounted, eyes sharp. "Told you she was mine. You chose wrong. Rancher." "She ain't yours," Caleb said. "Not by law, not by blood, not by God. She's her own, and you're not man enough to see it." The man's face darkened. He gave a signal, and 2 of his men moved forward. Caleb didn't hesitate. The rifle barked once, dust exploding under a rider's boots as he fell. The second drew fast, but Caleb was faster, swinging the rifle stock into his jaw, cracking bone. The leader pulled his pistol, aiming straight at Caleb. And then she stepped forward, barefoot in the dirt, dress whipping in the wind. She looked at the man who claimed her. Her voice was steady, quiet, but it carried. "You don't own me. You never did." The man snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. Caleb raised his rifle, but before he could fire, she moved. In one swift motion, she grabbed the knife from Caleb's belt and drove it clean into the man's chest. His pistol dropped to the dirt, eyes wide with shock. He fell without a word. The other riders froze, then scattered, fear overtaking loyalty. Dust swallowed them as they fled down the trail. Silence hung heavy over the ranch. Caleb stared at her, at the blood staining her hands, at the strange calm in her eyes. She smiled faintly, whispering, "I told you. I'm already gone." Her body swayed, weak, and Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. He felt the tremor in her breath, the life slipping from her like sand through open fingers. "No," he muttered, voice raw. "Not like this." But she only looked up at him, that eerie peace still written across her face. "You can't save what's already left." Her hand brushed his cheek, soft, fleeting, and then it fell away. Caleb sat there in the dirt, holding her, the world around him silent but for the slow beating of his own heart. He had fought wars, buried brothers, lost land and blood, but nothing had cut him this deep. He carried her inside, laid her on the bed, and for the first time in years, he prayed. The next morning, the sun rose like it always did, painting the desert gold. Caleb sat on the porch, her locket in his hand, rifle leaning against the wall. He knew others would come. Men like that never stopped at one loss. But something in him had changed. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a witness to a kind of courage most men never understood. So let me ask you something. Could you hold someone who was already lost? Could you fight for a soul that had already surrendered, knowing you might lose everything and still not save them? What would you do if the one thing you wanted to protect was already gone? If this story reached something inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Hit that like button, tap subscribe, and share this tale with someone who needs to remember The desert don't just take, sometimes it gives back a lesson you'll carry forever.